All right, we're live. Patriots Lament Radio, April 11, 2020. We got Josh Bennett, Corey Upton, Mike Anderson, and Dave Giesel here. Another bizarre week, and lots to talk about. If you guys are watching on YouTube, which is the only way to watch right now, actually, be sure to like the stream and comment. We monitor the live chat. There's a lot of lively discussion there. Subscribe to the channel, and if you like the content, please share it with your friends and social media and stuff like that. Call in. Yes, and call in. We will have a call-in number later on. Yep. So we got topics for each hour here. Hour one, we're going to talk about this situation in the world being the new normal, not waiting for things to change back. Hour two is going to be about not getting caught up in everything that's happening, like making sure you're grounded in reality but not getting stuck in it. And hour three, moving into the future. So how do you move from here, where we are, into something that's totally different? First thing we want to talk about in hour one, this being the new normal, is we want to talk about fake news. And we got a group chat, the four of us and some other folks, and we've been kicking around some fun fake news clips. So we are actually going to share some for you. They're going to be right here. You don't need to click a link or anything. You will be able to watch and listen, and we'll start off with this one, which is a real gem. Go for it, Corey.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling, irresponsible, one-sided news stories
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these things simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy, guys. So rather than have a discussion about the content of fake news, we could just talk about the presentation and orchestration. I mean, regardless of the content of what's on those channels, it's pretty obvious that they are not really writing their own stories. So you don't even really need to, you can get way down in the weeds of, are these facts correct or whatever. You don't even need to get down there. You have hundreds or thousands of stations reporting the exact same story because they're just reading it off a script that they get in their email. And so if there are any mistakes in any of those stories, they get multiplied by 1,000. Like, not only is there no local fact checking, but any errors get amplified through that mechanism. So you don't even really need fake news. You could just have some mistakes, and they're going to get multiplied across the entire media. And that's local news, too, because people say, oh, well, fake news is just CNN and Fox. Those are all local channels. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's one of the funny things. If people don't recognize what they're talking about, they're basically saying, only listen to us, because any other thing you get is going to be dangerous for your democracy, which would be like any alternative, like what we're doing. we're dangerous. Well, we are dangerous to democracy. But like you said, if they're wrong, it's amplified over and over and over and over. And they've been proven to be wrong over and over and over, and even knowingly wrong over and over.
Yeah, small mistakes echoed across the whole society, and then you get everybody agreeing that those errors are actually true. Well, I saw this on my local news, and I live in a different state than you. I posted up a link to Wikipedia to Operation Mockingbird. Mike, you know a little bit about that. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was basically a CIA project to use the media to parrot propaganda, largely for war efforts, but war against the public, I guess, is what we're looking at. It's basically a social engineering project. That's really all it is. It was, and getting back to your previous question, what do you guys think of that? The media, one of the things I talk about with democracy has a free press, right? So you can hear the diversity of opinions and information, and so that's the image, the illusion that we get, that we're, one of the reasons that we're free is because we have this diverse pool of opinions and information to pull from. But what we see in this case is that is not true. What we see in this case is that there is only one opinion and one set of information that comes out, and it comes out from a central source. And we can only guess at what that central source is. Personally, I would look at the entity that created Operation Mockingbird, because that was their intent. What you saw right there is Operation Mockingbird. So the media does not represent what you would have in a free democratic society. It's a total illusion.
We have one more clip. You got that one queued up, Corey? This one is Happy Easter, by the way. Tomorrow is Easter Sunday. And so we have an Easter-related clip also illustrating the same point. We will throw that on in just a moment. All right.
A lot of people think the big news stories today are the Supreme Court debate on gay marriage and the big snowstorm that's hitting the Midwest. But I checked out local news across the country, and apparently there's an even bigger story that is sweeping the nation right now. Take a look.
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take some of the spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take spring out of the step of the Easter Bunny.
Yeah, economic factors.
Only one of them went off script a little bit and added one extra word.
Right, and I think she actually read it wrong or something like that. It was just a mistake.
Right.
So that's not a particularly new clip. That clip's maybe 10 years old. And so this is like, none of this is new. And so the new normal that we find ourselves in right now is not really new. It's sort of always been going on. It's just we're getting to see it play out. At least that would be part of
Right.
mine.
It's being revealed.
There you go. That's a good way to put it. That is a good way to put it.
Which is something we talked about a while ago, which was how does this change our view of our history, right? Looking forward, things look different, but also looking backwards, things look different.
Mm-hmm. So one of the themes that you've talked about in light of that, Corey, is this idea of competing narratives. So we just went through fake news. We just gave some examples about that, and now I think it'd be good to talk about competing narratives, because news is a narrative, and when we're absorbing news and living out the possibilities that are within that world, we're stuck in that story. It's like you jump into a story, and then once you're in the story, you can only be certain people, and you can only do certain things. So just a quick reminder for everybody, as Patriots Lament Radio, if you guys are liking the stream, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And please share it over social media if you're enjoying so far. So competing narratives and the world of stories. I have a link to a YouTube video that I would recommend people watch. This is Jonathan Peugeot talking about the symbolism of epidemics. And one of the things he talks about in there is that we live in a bizarre time where the folks who 2 months ago were saying that, you need 100% open borders and stuff like that, are now saying we need 100% lockdowns. And the folks who 2-3 months ago were saying we need to slam the border shut and not allow anyone across, are saying that stay-at-home orders are unconstitutional. And so you have this total reversal of roles. The epidemic is causing all this chaos between these narratives. It's showing what's inadequate about all of them. And the stories are incompatible with each other, right? That's what's so weird about the time we're in, is the stories that there's a story that this is super deadly. There's a story that it's not a big deal. It's just the numbers are being added up weird. And you can't actually resolve those two. You can't resolve the best way to get rid of a virus is to be outside in the sun where the temperature fluctuates and there's UV, versus the best way is to prolong it as long as possible so that people get sick over the longest period of time, so you don't overwhelm the healthcare system. Like, they're competing narratives. We've had a lot of conversations about that. How are you guys each assessing these stories and figuring out which end is up? We've been doing it on these broadcasts every once in a while. What have you guys been doing, like, personally, as far as that goes?
If I can talk about it in a more general sense,
Mm-hmm.
there's always some form of mainstream narrative about just about any topic, and it doesn't mean it's right. It just means that a lot of people are there for the reasons that we saw in that clip. It gets repeated more than other stories. Now you can go off the standard narrative, but that gets risky because while you may find your truth or whatever, there's no the extremes go a lot further once you're off the narrative, and you can get into crazy stuff, and that can be kind of isolating because there's nobody else or not many other people participating in those narratives. So I think that there's a real danger and a real fear when it comes to leaving the standard narrative on anything, which is why you get a big grouping or a big clustering of people who stick to the safety of the ideas in the mainstream.
This is what the Overton window is essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put a link up to that for people playing along at home. The Overton window is kind of the window of discussion that's allowed within your society, your community at any point in time. Fortunately, this show has never really fallen inside the Overton window.
Yeah, I think there's a way of doing it where you, I don't want to say balance, but you take in competing ideas and you kind of let them play out against each other, and not having real strong pulls in either direction. Kind of, it keeps you from being burdened by the being tied to the mainstream narrative, but also you don't get stuck at your own version of it either.
Mm-hmm. In your own echo chamber.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Josh? Like with all these stories of, this or that, like even in Alaska, there's a ton of those floating around. Where are you, how are you sorting wheat from chaff?
Josh, looking pretty frozen.
Mark. Oh no.
There you go. I think I can hear your audio. If you shut off your video, your audio might make it.
Yeah. The mainstream stuff, I just kind of check out the window, but I do listen to what they're saying, but I don't really believe what they're saying. But on the other side of it, what I've
Oh, everybody's down.
Everybody's down. That's okay. We have Josh will get back in. Be all good. We have one more clip I would like to play. Let me kick you the link for this, Corey. It is another Jonathan Pajot video. So I highly recommend his channel for discussion of narrative. He talks about the world as a place of symbolism, and so for these competing narratives, his commentary is great. Anyway, he did another video this week about this European comic Asterix, and it's very interesting. I'm just going to say that, so we can just play it, and then we can talk about it. We can talk about it on the backside of playing it. You got that one queued up? I just put it.
Am I back?
Yeah, we're gonna roll through a clip, and then we're gonna talk about it.
I want to finish what I don't know what I even said, what got through, but I've been astounded about how many people that I didn't think would just like swallow hook, line, and sinker the story. And as time goes on and the same narrative gets pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded enough, and it becomes the truth, how many people eventually just, this has to be true. So, and like the video we just watched, so many people are saying the same thing. With the social distancing and, well, the overrunning of the hospitals and the shortage of the beds, and today we're supposed to hit peak ventilator use. Thousands of them supposedly sitting. What about 2 weeks ago when we were going to run out of it? New York's 300,000, whatever. We're wrong about every single, but you anymore. There's economy back out there. Who believes that crap?
Yeah, the brilliance of
No, that's
the interesting thing about the current situation is, so like the war on terror, there were a few events and a few infrequent events justified continual control. And with this, it's even better because there's only one event, and it doesn't involve the destruction of physical property, and it can be milked almost infinitely. So
And the risk is always there.
And the risk is always there, and you can't quantify it because you're not.
Yeah, it's not a group. It's not a group that you have control over. It's this nebulous thing that is always waiting to come back next fall.
Yep. And you can't see it, and you can't smell it.
And it separates people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas 9/11 brought people together and really rallied everyone. This is very explicitly keeping people separated.
Divisive.
And that means you can't organize, and you can't even talk without using phones, and it makes it harder for people to get together and talk in privacy. So.
Mm-hmm. Let's play this this clip of Peugeot. So this fits in with the fake news thing that we talked about earlier, and it fits in particularly with these narratives. So check this out.
As we plunge further and further into this pandemic, some people have noticed that a comic book in 2017 published by Belgian authors called Asterix and the Chariot Race has a strange character in it called coronavirus. It has left a lot of people perplexed, wondering what this could mean, if it means anything. And so I want to look at Asterix comics in general and this one in particular to see how this actually makes sense, that it's in this comic book that we would have seen a strange prophecy of what is happening today. This is Jonathan Peugeot. Welcome to the symbolic world. Now, Asterix is one of the most famous European comic books. A lot of people are not aware of that in the United States because Americans don't interact much with other cultures. But when I was young, as a French-speaking French Canadian, I read Asterix comics all the time. And what's interesting in Asterix comics is that it is really about what is happening today. There is a lot of stuff in there which is dealing with the problem of Europe, for example, the problem of globalism, because the story of Asterix is about a Gaul 50 years before Christ, in the time when Julius Caesar was expanding the beginning of the Roman Empire, and he's taken over Gaul. But there is one village in Gaul that is resisting, and it is Asterix's village. Most of the stories revolve around how these Gaul village resists the Roman power, how they're fighting the Romans, how the Romans try to take them over through different strategies, through infiltration, through giving them a lot of money, giving them a lot of financial opportunities, all kinds of strategies that they will find in order to finally invade this Gaul village. But the village has a secret potion, which is made by a druid, which gives them invulnerability and therefore helps them to resist the Roman Empire. Now, of course, we can understand that the whole comic book is about identity and the problem of identity and the problem of a system, a government, which would try to include everything and not leave room for a an exception, not leave room also for other smaller identities to exist within in relationship to the bigger one, to at least have all those identities be included in the big empire, rather than have it on the outside. And so the Gauls are like an annoyance to Julius Caesar. He's always annoyed to think about the fact that he was not able to take over all of Gaul. There is this remainder on the side which continues to bother him. So he always wants to include all of it. Now, you can see how it can be related to questions of identity in general, questions of borders, questions of exceptions, question also of marginal identities within the empire. All of these ideas are floating around. National identities as well are being dealt with in the story of Asterix. But in this particular comic, what we have is, because the Roman Empire, the comic, to be honest, is not particularly good. The story is rather mediocre, but the tenets of the story are interesting to think about in terms of what is happening to us today. And so in the Roman Senate, they realize that there's a deficiency in Rome, that the Roman roads are full of potholes, and that the Roman roads need to be repaired. And the person who's responsible for that is decadent and is always going to orgies and is not doing his job. And in order to kind of mask that, or to look over, so that people look over his deficiency, he calls upon having a trans-Italic race, a race across all of Italy in which all peoples can be involved, and this will prove the superiority of the Roman roads, because they're going to have the race on the Roman roads. But not only that, they also want a Roman to win this race so that Rome is glorified as the race is happening. And so the person who is going to run for the Romans is wearing a mask, a golden mask with a smile on it. And his name is Coronavirus. And his assistant on the chariot is Bacillus, which is also a bacteria that, it's a form of bacteria. And so you have this virus and this bacteria as the Roman race, and the person, the character hidden behind the mask, is the Roman soldier. So we don't know who it is. Now, the whole thing takes on all kinds of turns, the twists and turns that aren't particularly that interesting. But one of the interesting aspects is that in the race, you have all these different cultures. You have these two women from the kingdom of Kush, who are kind of Ethiopian, African looking. And then you have different peoples of Europe, Egyptians and, Phoenicians and the Goths and all these, and the Russians are there as well. You have all these different nationalities who are racing against coronavirus. And secretly, you find out that coronavirus is actually cheating. The reason why he's winning is because every day they swap the horses and they give them new horses. And so coronavirus is winning. And so in order to stop them, to stop coronavirus, they have to band together. All these different peoples have to band together in order to fight the coronavirus. So what's interesting, the story, like I said, it's not that particularly interesting. But what I want to point attention to is the elements of the story, and how all the elements of the story, even though the story plays out one way or another, are the elements of the situation we're dealing with today. When the story ends, we find out that through all kinds of twists and turns, we find out that hiding behind the coronavirus mask is Julius Caesar, and that he is the one, in fact, who is trying to finish the race. And he's not able to finish the race because he falls into a pothole, and the Gauls win. But in the end, Julius Caesar, for some reason, is happy, and he gives the trophy to the Gauls, who then give it to another tribe, and they give it to another tribe, and they pass the trophy down from tribe to tribe. And in the end, everybody's happy, diversity and unity, all that stuff that that people are talking about today. But what's interesting to look at is a few elements. One is the problem of all these different identities who are participating in this race against the coronavirus. The other thing is that hiding behind the coronavirus is the global empire, which is trying to show its glory and which is trying to compensate for the potholes which have appeared in its structure. and is therefore trying to compensate for that by winning this race. And so, like I said, it's just very fascinating to see how all the elements are there, and how, even without talking about whose intention, what intention lies behind this epidemic, we can still see the players move, and we can still see how the problem of the epidemic of the coronavirus is an opportunity for different things to play out. One of the possibilities of how things are going to play out is going to be in the return to borders and the reaffirmation of identities at all levels of reality, from national identities by closing borders, even closing borders between states. In the United States, we're seeing that happen, closing borders between cities and rural areas. All of this closing of borders can end up with a more a reality which emphasizes identities at different levels. But it is also possible that because of this epidemic, there will be a clampdown of power from above, and a desire to install mechanisms of control, the likes of which we have never seen before. And so we need to be attentive to that. As you will see, I will probably be putting out another video about this very soon, about the question of identity and exchange in the problem of the epidemic. And so stay tuned to that. I will be trying to put out videos at least once a week for the next few weeks to deal with some of the issues that are happening. And so thanks everybody for your support, and I will see you very soon. If you enjoy.
Cool. Yeah, like that. Yeah, interesting video. Pajot's channel. I linked that up in the comments in the live chat. His channel deals a lot with narrative and symbolism, and when you look at what's happening today in light of that, it pulls you out of the news discussion and puts you into a different discussion where what's going on is, it follows the story arc, and it pulls you out of the weeds of like what happened today. Anyway, particularly odd that there would be a comic about the coronavirus 3 or 4 years ago in Europe.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it being a mask and the global power structure behind the mask is especially weird. And they ended up losing the race because of the potholes of the like the inefficiencies that were created due to, or came about as a result of mismanagement and not being vigilant about what's going on.
The pre-existing problems in the society, which is something that we've talked about with the economy. The economy was already on a knife edge and ready for collapse, and then along comes coronavirus and sort of distracts from that. So yeah, the thematic similarities are pretty crazy.
He talks about the borders, and right at the last there, there's the whole part about, we're all diverse and we want to cooperate and all that. Well, what they're doing now today in the real world is interesting. It's what you would want to do if you wanted to tear down the borders and the national identity. Not that we're all for open. Not that we're all for borders, right? We're anarchists. So, but the whole point is they want a world system that they can control. It's like control the herd of animals with one whip, right? Under a single whip. And so this is what you would want to do. You would want to create a situation where it is difficult to impossible to travel across borders to do your business. And then the people of the world say, this is just too difficult to do business. We can't have an economy. We need to do something. So what do? they create a world state that has universal rules, like let's see, how about forced universal vaccination as one of them, and everyone has to abide by this in order to go about their business. So in order to bring about the goal, they have to push things in the opposite direction for a time until people get angry and they spring back the other way. So that's kind of where I see when he's talking about the borders. That was what I was seeing there. That this is what they would want to do.
Yep. Which is how it kind of works out in the story there too. And then they share in the victory. They pass the trophy around and congratulate each other.
Yeah, that whole sharing thing and the pretty rainbow. It reminds me of the it reminds me of what I see in some of the news stories about New Zealand. With the everyone putting up pictures, they're closed businesses and they have the pictures of the hearts and holding hands, and it's all like a giant kindergarten classroom. And to me, it's repulsive, but that's kind of what they push. It's the state-enforced lovingness by some central master.
Replacing community or displacing community. Yeah.
Yeah, with fake love fake love under the point of a gun.
Right. It's all abstract because you can't visit your neighbors at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that goes into our third topic for the hour. So topic 3 is more controls. So, hour 1, this is the new normal. We're talking about how things are not going to go back to the way they were. They never do go back to the way they were, by the way. And we covered some fake news, which is basically, actually, without exception, all news. At the beginning, we talked about some narrative structures and the competing stories that we live in, and now more controls on the way. And we had a conversation. Mike just got into that with the this coronavirus comic that we were just discussing. The theme is that this unity of rulers at the end is what solves the problem they're trying to solve, which is sort of where things appear to be going in our world. We had a conversation with Bob Wenzel from Economic Policy Journal about a week ago. It was last Friday, so not yesterday, but the week before. And one of the comments that he made that I thought was really good was that he's not surprised when the people in government take power that's offered to them. And I remember certainly when I first got into kind of libertarianism, and I think it's true of a lot of people when they get into libertarianism, there's like this indignation because the system that's supposed to be working on your behalf, from our school education, turns out to not be. And then and you learn why. You learn about incentives and stuff like that in economics. There's no incentives against corruption in government, or there's very few. And so you can see clearly why things tend in the direction of corruption. And yet there's still a tendency to carry that indignation with you. And it was really neat because Bob didn't have that. He said, yeah, of course people in power are going to use this to consolidate power. Duh.
What do you expect?
What do you expect? Right. And and to him, the question was kind of, that's the world. So how do you operate within that world? Not how do you get upset about that world? What did you get? You guys were on that call. We had a good talk with Bob. What did you guys think about his take on that and moving through that?
Well, Mike, go first. Mike,
got any thoughts on that, Mike? Yeah, go for it, Corey.
Yeah, so it's kind of like your starting point and your expectation. So he seemed really, I guess, pragmatic about that, because people tend to assume that things are going to be taken care of for them. That's what we've seen in this crisis is something bad is happening, and it's the somebody else's responsibility to take care of it. And he takes that to the next level, which is kind of assuming the opposite, and that anyone in power will eventually end up misusing it in a sense. I saw an article about the well, two things. One, the Taliban often provides aid to people in villages because they have like a mafia thing going on. And today I saw the similar story from Italy, where the Italian mafia was providing food and stuff to people that weren't getting enough to eat because they couldn't get out of their houses. And it's kind of the reverse of the government story, which is normally the government helps you, but sometimes it takes stuff from you. And the mafia and the Taliban are a little more transparent in those roles, where normally they're, you see their bad face most of the time, but they also provide services when it's in their best interest to keep their opinion up.
Latin American government is really similar to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody knows it's corrupt, even in the areas that are that are less corrupt. And there's like disappointment about it, but it's different than the indignation here. Like here, if you talk about it, you have to be really careful and say, well, I just mean this one senator. That's all I mean. I don't mean anything systematic. So it's sanitized in a weird way here. We were just, Josh, we were just talking about Bob Wenzel's comment that he's not surprised that the government tries to take, when handed more power, he's not surprised that they take it, like the additional controls. And how, like, as libertarians, or many, libertarians, especially new ones, when they first get in, there's like this indignation, like whenever they run into a corrupt politician, like, oh no, another one, as if it's surprising. What did you think about Bob's comment there, and using that as like a framework to assess what's going on?
I've actually liked his take, well, just about on everything, but on this whole thing, I probably follow what he says more than, his websites or whatever, more than any other one. And I think he's just being a realist, and really just, it's almost not in a mocking way, but more of a you're surprised why type of deal. And he's really just saying, look, we know this, guys. We already know this. We've been saying that this is who these people are for so long. Why are we surprised? Don't be surprised. It's happening. We don't know exactly how or what's going to happen, but move on. I'm here stunned and going, oh my gosh, they'll actually shut us down? Urgh. Of course they will. Oh my gosh, they might not let us go back to work next month? Of course they will, or won't.
Mm-hmm.
Quit being surprised. Move on. Quit being kids. Let's go. Now start living what you've been preaching for the last umpteen years.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like it's time to be the actual light on the hill.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I just loved his whole attitude towards this thing. And he's not mean about it. Right? He doesn't go after people like, oh, I can't believe you believe in the coronavirus. Rawr. He's not like that at all. But to people that follow, his work, he's like, guys, we know, settle down. And I think it's good too to not be. We should be the ones that are calm about it and more sure of ourselves as things are going along, because we shouldn't be surprised. And at the same time, not being surprised, it helps us not really control the narrative, but we can put a different narrative out there because, I get people calling me like, what do you think's happening now? It's all because they hate Trump, right? What? No. They're all the same. They're doing exactly what the Constitution intended them to do. Say that. It's exactly what power does. I think it's been great for teaching part with the Constitution or with political activism. There are no good guys. That's why the worst rise to the top. That is the political system.
The clamoring around Trump too, verdict's out. Like, I don't know, what the deal on him is, but I'm not waiting for it to be different. The folks who are the most attached to this being an orchestrated takedown of Trump also get stuck in the boat of waiting for things to go back to the way they were, because their whole narrative is once Trump defeats the takedown, it's MAGA. MAGA is going back to the way things were, but nobody has ever articulated what that means. And so because they put themselves inside of the MAGA story, they can't do anything else. They can't do anything until Trump has defeated the globalists or whatever. They're just stuck waiting.
But you can't trust what he's thinking, because on his daily news briefings, the first thing he wants to talk about is the ratings that he's getting.
Mm-hmm.
And then today he's got a 95% approval rating from Republicans. Well, if he's got a 95% approval rating from Republicans, why the heck would he change course now?
Mm-hmm.
He's doing what the masses want him to do, which he is doing what the masses want him to do too. They want to be shut down. They're scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
But how many of the powers that they passed after 9/11 have they rescinded? None. We're not going back. This is the new normal.
Yep. Bob really was good at pointing that out as well. Trump using the poll numbers, and he'll milk it as long as it works for the poll numbers. That's his master. His master is the poll numbers.
Yep, and he'll dip and dive to follow them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When they reach their curve and they start to flatten, then he'll go somewhere else to make it rise again.
That's right.
That's not the curve he wants to flatten.
Go for it, Mike. Yep.
No, I was going to come at it from a slightly different angle. There's also the angle that this is part of a cycle, right? None of this stuff. We in our lifetimes we look at stuff as though it's increasing. That the tyranny is increased over our lifespan, but beyond our lifespan, does it just perpetually increase, or do societies increase for a while? Or, does this stuff in society increase for a while? Then does it decrease? As a waterfall? So, things cycle back and forth. And so, if you go back into the last century, you had the 20th century was kind of the century of socialism. You had Marx in 1848. Then you had the socialist revolutions in the 1930s, the 1934 socialist revolution in Spain, and then the one in the U.S. I mean, the FDR and Social Security and all the government, all the make work programs. That was a socialist revolution. And so socialism had its day, and now it's failed. The monetary systems in Europe are failing, and you had separatist movements throughout Europe, And perhaps coronavirus is one thing they wanted to use to try to stop that, but it's not going to stop that. Those people aren't just going to say, oh, because of coronavirus, I don't want to separate anymore. That's not going to happen. And you have the projections that that the U.S. will no longer be the economic capital of the world. It'll move to Asia. That the U.S. will see its own separatist movements, and it already has its own separatist movements. Eventually, and it's not going to be too many years out, maybe 2 or 3 years out, who knows. The currency is not going to be viable because they don't want it to be. They want an electronic currency. They don't want cash. And so what's going to happen then? Are we going to see just a continuation, an uphill continuation in tyranny, or are we going to see it cycle up and down? Are we going to see a breaking apart of the United States that will actually lead to greater freedom because they have less centralized control? Over the years, over the past many decades, 100 years or so, 80 years, I guess, you've had sports, for example, as a distraction. Every Sunday, people can get together during the football season or the baseball season or whatever it is, and they can use the sports as their outlet. They can sit down and watch it together. They can't sit down and watch it together anymore because you can no longer have more than 10 people together. They can't sit down in front of the TV with their frozen pizzas and their beer anymore because you can't have more than 10 people together in a party. They can't get together in the stadiums anymore because now they don't fill the stadiums. So the distractions have been taken away, and all that pent-up desire for revolt that sports kind of takes out, the opportunity is no longer there. So where is that going to get placed? I mean, where's that going to come out? Eventually, it has to come out, and they're going to get angry. We can't get together for our parties, for our sports. We can't even go out to the field to play sports anymore. I mean, I have a gym membership in Fairbanks. I can't use it when I go back. I can't use the pool. I can't go use the exercise machines. I have to sit at home now. That's not going to work. People are going to revolt over those things. Hopefully, that'd be a great thing.
If the Patriots are in the Super Bowl this year, there's going to be a revolt here at my house.
Good.
We're going to party down.
The more revolt, the better. And that's kind of where I'm going with it. Just revolt with whatever.
Nope. You're muted.
Oops.
Man,
well, let's pick up where you.
There we go.
Sorry,
yeah, it keeps going to sleep. Anyway, I don't see it as a linear progression that's just going to continue. I see it as a cycle, and they're pushing us into a cycle. And I think they don't realize. I kind of think they don't realize what they're doing. They want this global world order, a global dictatorship. They're using coronavirus to do it. They're trying to lock everyone in their houses. They're threatening to. There's a bill put out, and I think it's Connecticut, an idea to be able to take your kids away if you're diagnosed with coronavirus. And they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing. And Bill Gates is talking about how he wants to inject chips in you with a verifiable vaccine record to prove your immunity to coronavirus or whatever sickness is out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're pushing too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the saving grace. They push too hard. People are going to revolt. And the options are either to go along with what they're doing or to become independent. And for years, we have been told that how we're a connected world. We're such a connected world, and we just all need to get along and learn from each other. And they just keep pushing that narrative. But we're not. We're independent individuals who work together when we choose to, when we find benefit in it. And that's the opportunity for us to go down that road.
You know, the working class folks in my neighborhood, just to recap for people out there who might have just joined in, we are talking about more controls and how authorities taking more controls when they're given to them is no surprise, and what to do about it. The working class folks in my neighborhood, they don't really have an opinion about. I shouldn't say universally. There's a few who I know, and as far as the coronavirus goes, they're kind of like, yeah, might be a thing, might not be a thing. I just want to go to work, make a few bucks, pay my rent. And it's interesting because they're not revolutionary minded, but there's a point at which it doesn't matter. Like they're like, a lot of working class folks know that life is full of risk and that people die and that stuff's uncertain. And I haven't seen a super high degree of fear from blue collar type folks. It seems to be more in the white collar area. And I wonder how many people are in that, that blue collar, life's hard, you got to work, you might die mentality, who won't even view, ignoring rules or whatever at some point. They won't view that as a revolutionary act. It'll just be like, look, I got mouths to feed. I'm going to work, or whatever it may be. I think there's a lot more of those people than we know about because the news doesn't cater to them. And there's very little reporting that's done on them. Like occasionally they're put on a reality TV show to make fun of. But there's a lot of those folks, and they're pretty grounded just in the day-to-day of their lives. And so to the point you were talking about, Mike, of things being pushed too far, when these folks can't live their regular day-to-day life, they're just going to go and do what they got to do. That's what they've always done to survive.
Yeah, and that refusal, just refusal to follow rules, like you're talking about, that's a revolutionary act. And honestly, that's where it needs to go. So that will be the natural tendency. And if you're looking at a system where the economic system has collapsed, can they pay for, or can they not pay for, the enforcers to run around and test people mandatorily at their doorsteps? Because that's one of the things they're actually talking about. Let's go around and test people at their front door for COVID. I think be able to keep paying the enforcers to do that kind of stuff.
Well, what's funny about that is they might do that. There's a guy, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and he is going back to work. He got a little bit of work this week. At his work, they're going to start taking people's temperatures when they get there. And that's like one of the, I think if you're deemed an essential business, a lot of places are making you have a COVID-19 health plan or whatever. So they're going to take people's temperatures. The funny thing about all that stuff is it doesn't really tell you anything. Like there's all sorts of reasons your temperature could be elevated. It doesn't mean COVID-19. And like the funny thing with the vaccines and the vaccine records is like vaccines don't work forever. You have to get them updated. Like most vaccines you get like 5 or 10 years of immunity or something like that. And so it could be that the powers that be have forgotten that those things don't work forever. So even if they do stuff like that, it doesn't work forever. And when it's shown not to work, there'll be votes of no confidence in it, and mostly by normal people. I don't think Berwick says the revolution will not be televised, which is, I forget what the original reference is, but the people who aren't going to go along with stuff are probably already not going along with it, and we're never going to hear about them on the news. And so what we see on the news is always going to be biased in the direction of see, everybody's doing the right thing except you, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I have a friend. Actually, we all have a friend who's been talking to people Most of the people he talks to, he says like 90%, just say, yeah, I'm not, this is all bull, and I'm not taking a chip or a vaccine that they try to make me take. So people just aren't buying it. When it comes to Bill Gates, who's centerpiece running this whole thing, I kind of think he's gotten so used to his position of power and richness that he tends to believe that he can be the central planner of an economy. He made that one comment on that Reddit post we did a couple weeks ago, I think, where he talked about what we need to determine what the essential businesses are so we can keep them open and operating. He actually thinks he can decide what essential businesses are, and this is the centerpiece of communism. And it indicates to me that he is megalomaniacal and lost in his own sense of power. And because of that, he's going to lose. He's going to fail at this. He might get a couple years of it, but people are not going to keep. They're going to revolt once it is no longer comfortable. People put up with stuff when it's comfortable. And we talked a while back. Well, a few years ago, we talked about the whole idea of the New World Order and the world state, and how it's just not a feasible system. And it's really not. Look how difficult it is to hold the United States together, 320 million people, under one dictator. I mean, the election process is approaching a point of violence at this point because people just hate the other party so much. And do they actually think they're going to hold 7.5 billion people together in a single state?
Not going to happen. And it's not a new story. I mean, we had this episode on Monday where we talked about Nebuchadnezzar. It's the same exact story.
Yeah, you might have a world state with great power for a short time, or you might have a world state with a little power for a long time. You can't have both. You cannot have a world state with great power for a long time. It's not possible to exist because of market forces. And people like Bill Gates, it doesn't seem to understand market forces because he thinks he can dictate what are essential businesses and what aren't.
That's the mark of people who are lost in power is they believe that they're the exception to the rules, not that they're subject to them.
Right.
Yeah, totally agree.
So the system's going to fail. You might as well not cooperate with it.
Move through it. If you end up in a gulag, you're way worse off than if you manage to stay on your farm. So there's considerations to be made as far as that goes. Like the guy at Walmart licking the packages, who's in jail right now, he's having a worse time than the rest of us are. So there's things to think about. We have some of Bob Wenzel right here. We're at the end of an hour, so we're going to do about a 5-minute break here. We got Bob Wenzel queued up. He was on our show last week. We're going to give you guys a little tease.
Hi, Corey. I don't know you, but you're as good as these.
Friday, we've been watching where different stuff moves around, oil, precious metals, Wall Street markets, crypto markets. And the way that they're moving relative to each other is very odd. We've been trying to make sense of that. And we've also been talking about modern monetary theory, MMT, a little bit.
Right.
And this idea of kind of money as a service instead of money as a commodity. What's your take on what's going on? We're trying to make kind of heads and tails of it. What is your take on what's going on with the way everything's moving around? There's this thing with oil.
Basically, what's going on? You have what really is a complete shakeup of the entire system. There's an economist by the name of G.L.S. Shackle, who I'm convinced must have been a stock market trader and lived through different crashes and things. Because what he talked about it is, there are all these trends that go on and go on. Boy, they're all coming after me now. So they're all these trends that continue, and then what happens is you have a situation, what he called a kaleidoscopic change. So all the trends that used to occur no longer apply anymore, and it's like a kaleidoscope. So everything's different, and you just see a completely different picture. So that's what's going on now. Some of the reasons that is going on, for example, with gold, where you see gold making all kinds of erratic moves. Sometimes you see it going up against the stock market, then other days you see it going down. Now, before this crisis developed, I'm convinced, and I have something called the EPJ Daily Alert, where I advise investors and things along those lines. And what was going on is you had a situation where it looked like the big players were getting into gold. I mean, all Goldman Sachs, everybody was coming out and making advisories to buy gold, and it just looked like they were going to have a play in gold. So what happens is you have this crash, the country's closed down, so all these big players have all this money in gold, and meanwhile they're getting margin calls and everything else in other positions, so they might just have to liquidate their gold position, not because they want to, but they need to raise cash. And where they're going to raise cash is something that hasn't gone down. So that's one of the things that's going on. The oil situation is kind of a unique situation because the key oil players, Russia really needs an oil price of about $45 to $50. I think Putin even talked about that today. But in order for oil to pay the bills of Saudi Arabia needs a much higher price of $80. So there might be a case. Russia is supposedly one that broke the compact and said they would no longer be supporting the oil price. But it might have been a case where Russia and Saudi Arabia might have been in cahoots together. And given that demand is collapsed, so you're going to have tremendous pressure on oil right there. What you do on top of that is you flood the market with oil and push it down even more to try and kill U.S. oil production, because the president of Rosneft, the top Russian oil company, he is very upset with the United States for putting sanctions on his company to make it much more difficult for him to sell his oil. So he has incentive to sort of smash U.S. oil. Saudi Arabia has incentive, although they sort of play footsie with the United States, so it's more complex. But they would like to see U.S. oil smashed because they need an $80 price to pay the bills that they're spending on a regular basis. So there's complex stuff going on, and that's why you see these wild swings. At 1 minute you hear reports, OPEC is going to put production limits on again, and so it swings up. And then Trump talks about Saudi Arabia and Russia getting a deal, and it goes up. Then it sounds like it doesn't happen. It crashes down. So my advice to my EPJ Daily Alert advisors is say, hey, forget about these crazy swings because they're going to swing all over the place. There's no way you can determine what they're going to be from one day to the next. You have to ignore this and pay attention to what's going to happen once the crisis is over. And once the crisis is over, you're going to be in a completely different scenario. And that's when you have to what you have to position for. When stuff goes down here, if it's going to be a buy after the crisis is over, you buy it when it's down, and then you just grab on and wait for the other side of the crisis. So that's what you have to do.
When the other side ever shows up.
Yeah, exactly.
So like on oil prices, nobody can make ends meet at $20 or $25 or $29.
Right. So Saudi Arabia can pump profitably at $28.
Okay.
However, MBS is spending so much money, and he really has to pay it out to his citizens, because there would be a revolution in Saudi Arabia if he didn't. So he needs the price up. So, yeah, I mean, at some point it'll get up after the crisis. But really, strategically, I mean, if I was Russia or Saudi Arabia, this is the time you would really want to smash oil because the demand isn't there. So you're not going to be able to get the price up anyways. And you just smash it down and knock out U.S. producers to the degree you can do that.
We've been following some other kind of crisis. Okay, we are back. This little clip of Robert Wenzel from last Friday, not yesterday, but a week ago Friday. This is Patriots Lament Radio for all you who are new out there, April 11th, 2020. Got myself, David, joined by Corey, Josh, and Mike. And in the first hour, we were going through this is the new normal. So a lot of people are like talking about, when are things going to get back to normal? And one of the themes of our discussions is they're not going to get back to normal. So get ready for the new normal. Hour two now, we want to talk about not getting caught up in what's going on. Like the best way to have all of your energy neutralized is to get caught up in things that are out of your control. And we have three topics to discuss along the lines of not getting caught up. One of them is when one door closes, another opens, which is a Alexander Graham Bell quote. But it's a passage from Acts that we want to talk about concerning that. The other subtopic for not getting caught up is this idea of staying at the picnic. So there's a little video that we're going to watch that talks about like scale. It's like the scale at which you can view things. And one of the scales is like a 6 foot by 6 foot box where like you're in a park having a picnic with somebody or with your family, something like that. That's a scale you can view things at. Or you could view things zoomed out, where you see the whole universe, or you could view things zoomed in where you see every tiny little atom. And not all those scales are as useful, especially for living your life. And then the last topic for not getting caught up is that there is a lot to do. Like even with everything shut down, there is no shortage of things to do. And so there's a Jordan Peterson clip that I want to play talking about something you can work on. Basically, whatever you've been hiding from. We all have stuff that we've been hiding from, stuff that isn't going right, or relationships that aren't the way they should be. Now is a wonderful time to face those and to fix them, because we don't have the distraction of work and busy stuff going on and whatever. There's a lot of time to focus on those. So those are the three things we're going to jump through this hour. First up is Acts 16:6 through 12. So this is the whole idea of one door closes, another opens. And that is one of it's easy to see all the opportunities that are closing right now. A lot of businesses are getting slammed. Stuff just is not going well for them. And so one of the things we've talked about is even if things move in a really socialist direction, there are going to be a lot of opportunities that open up because there's debt being forgiven. And there's the services that are not going to be offered by these companies that went out of business. Somebody's going to have to fill the gap, and they're going to have to fill the gap with a different structure, or a different type of business, or something that we haven't even thought about. Maybe not even a business. There might be space with all the new regulations. There might be space where you just do stuff and people like give you some bucks for doing it because you're not allowed actually to work because it's not essential. So I'm going to go through a quick synopsis of Acts 16:6 through 12. So Paul is traveling with his companions through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, and he felt like he was supposed to go to Asia. And what it says in Acts is that the he was kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching in Asia. And then he tried to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow him to. So he kept on encountering a feeling or opportunities that were they were doors that were closing. So one night on this road, he had a vision of a man in Macedonia. And the guy in Macedonia in this vision said, "Hey, you need to come here and help us out. Like, we need you to come here and teach us." And so when he got up the next day, he put these pieces together. It's like, okay, all the places I've been trying to go that I thought I was supposed to go did not work. Those doors closed. And here's a vision of a guy in Macedonia saying, come teach us. So they recharted their course and they went towards Macedonia, believing that God had called them to go and preach and to share the good news with them. So that's this little synopsis of Acts 16, 6 through 12. And right now, it's really easy to get caught up with all the doors that are closing. I think especially as Americans, so-called. America is changing. And well, maybe it's not changing, but it's being revealed to be what it is, which is not this land of freedom and opportunity, and not in the way that people thought it was a year ago or even a few months ago. And I think it's easy to sit around and lament that and be sad, but there's all sorts of other opportunities out there. And there's probably a lot of Americans or people who live there who would be better placed somewhere else or doing something else. And this is an opportunity to explore that, because there's kind of nothing to lose right now. What are you guys' feelings about that? I know Corey and I have talked about that a little bit. Josh and I have talked about that a bit. What's your take on that?
Well, the first thing I heard was that God hates the Chinese too, because he wouldn't let Paul go to Asia. So I think there must be something into that. The Chinese virus. No, it takes a little bit of, I guess, a little bit of courage to do what you're saying, because there's a fear factor to get outside of our box. And you're talking about a 6 by 6 foot box. A lot of us have a 6 inch by 6 inch box, and it's really hard to move outside of that. And because we've been not necessarily wrongly, but we've trained ourselves to be inside of that box. We're focused. This is what I do. This is what I do. Especially if you want to do it well. It's really hard, or it's really easy to focus on something to keep distractions outside of it, to where you don't look at anything else. I do it all the time because I want to do the job that I do perfect. I want to do it so well that I know there's opportunities that probably fly right by me I don't even think about. The digging holes and hauling freight to Pluto, I'm sure, is probably not the only thing I could think of doing with my life. But I've been really focused on it, and I haven't needed to look at anything else, much less wanted to. So it's hard. Go ahead.
I know we've talked about on the subject of people chasing things and never actually starting to work on them, and through doing that getting to live multiple lives. But when you start to act on something, it constrains you. So there's a lot of things you can talk about, infinite things, but you can only actually act on a finite number of them. And that enables you, if you make the decision to actually start working on something and get good at it, then you have the potential to become or to achieve some mastery at that thing. I guess the flip side of that coin is that there's also lots of other stuff out there and stuff that you can't think of. And maybe the takeaway that you get from working on one thing for a while is that if you go and work on something else, you kind of on one hand you're letting go of the thing that you were getting good at, but you've also gotten good at focusing on one thing, and that skill is applicable across any number of fields. So there's lots of stuff you can work on, and I think the danger is if you've been doing something for a long time, and then the world starts to change. Instead of finding one other thing and focusing on it, you start bouncing between lots of things, and you get pulled in too many directions. So it's a bit of a gamble when you choose what thing you're going to work on, but trying to stick with it is what makes you successful at it in the long term.
Yeah, that's like a little paradox where when you learn to focus on one thing, you'll be able to do many, because you'll be able to do one and then the next and then the next. Whereas if you don't focus on anything, none of them will work out. So you end up touching a lot of things, but never actually doing any of them. Yeah.
I wonder.
What you were talking about, Josh, you were talking about, focusing on something, getting really invested in it. It's like there's a point at which you can start to feel like you become your work. Like you lose track of who's who.
Yep. Now I wonder, just even boxing ourselves into thinking of the doors opening and opportunities monetarily is even a way of boxing ourselves in. We shouldn't look at, new opportunities, the new normal and all that just in, where am I going to work? What's the money supply going to be? What's the money going to be, period. But, instead of just economic factors, we're talking about opportunities we need to break outside of our box to look at in all sorts of things, like being actually free.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I'm really looking forward to people, some of these churches that are resisting, because I think if more and more, if the church pushes back, then I think we're rolling a little smoke. And I don't mean, shooting guns, but I mean, if there's a legitimate pushback, there's an opportunity right there. There's a higher power, guys. We follow it, no matter what you say. That could be a huge door.
You just said being actually free, and it made me think of the scripts that we've all written for our lives. And I think for a lot of people right now, those scripts have been recently or in the process of being shredded and recycled. And my encounter with that was one of withdrawing for a couple of weeks, and it was like, I'll just wait and see what happens. This whole wait and see thing. And it's like, well, maybe the script is reusable. And then more recently, I found that it's been very I've gotten very excited about it, because it's like, wow, well, here's a bunch of things that are now possible that I've always thought about, but didn't work in the they didn't fit into the culture that I saw, and that which is very focused on position, title, your job, your income, and as much as easy it is to talk about not using money or whatever as the metric of success, that's baked into our culture at such a deep level that it makes it really hard to actually act on it. And now with things changing, I think that there's a possibility of actually breaking from those metrics and allowing us to choose our own metrics.
Mm-hmm. Which are doors that we never even looked at to see if they were open.
So that's been very exciting for me because there's a lot of more things I've been considering doing with my life now.
Well, then being free too is not just free from the state involvement in our lives, but we do a good enough job enslaving ourselves in our lives. It would be nice to have the extra struggle of having the state put on things, take freedom away from us too. For one, it doesn't allow us to grow when they take away freedoms because we don't know how to make mistakes. They want to protect us from everything, just like with the COVID-19. Now, you have to follow this exactly or everyone's going to die. How do they know? Let us make our own mistakes. There's no way to grow if you can't make mistakes. There's no way to get free if you're not able to make the mistakes, learn from them, and move on. You'll never know what freedom even is. Like I said, we put enough hurdles in front of ourselves. It'd be nice just to get rid of that other outside hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's going to be hard. And I like what Layla's saying, which says that thinks that God's going to discipline the church for forsaking gathering together. And that's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting take, because it's something I struggle with. I don't like going to churches. I have a hard time just because I don't like a lot of what their underlying beliefs are. I hate the militarism of it, mostly. Drives me nuts. But, Scripture does tell us not to forsake the gathering. And cheers to the churches that have said, screw you guys, we're going to church. Good for them. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, even in America, because we're up into the rule of law and obey. Romans 13. Well, we obey God rather than man. And like she said, the early church were put to death for doing that. And we're scared. And, I don't even think it's the fines. Look at those people.
Mm-hmm.
They're screwing all of us. They're going to make us all sick. They're so stupid. They think their God's going to very much.
Yep. Some more bandwidth limitations. Yeah. If you can't make mistakes and do things differently, you're going to be stuck. And the rules on gatherings are absurd for everyone, and for believers in particular. Even within those rules, like the minimum gathering size, whatever it may be, 2 or 5 or 10 or whatever, there are opportunities to meet up with people and to have neighbors over and meet up with friends and things like that. So there are still opportunities to do that. And so even within the rules, there are windows where we can, meet each other. I've had a couple of folks come over from the church I go to, and we've just gone on some walks together, which is totally within the rules. There's nothing that even the most paranoid neighbor of mine would have issue with that. So, I think there's a way to gather. Well, I don't know. I mean, there's many opinions on this. There's a way to gather where you respect the wishes of your community, but you don't give up on meeting with your community as well. It's a little bit like, don't lick the food at Walmart, but don't live in a tremendous amount of fear. There's a way to do that. We have a caller on for this topic. I'm going to throw him in right now. Caller, you are on air.
What's up, brothers?
What's going on? Who is this?
Brother Nameless.
How's it going, Nameless? What's your comment on our topic here? How you faring?
Well, I like it. It's good. I like the thoughts, this and that. I following that trail myself. Little differences, you know. Absolutely, I think resistance, straight up resistance, but nonviolent resistance. I don't see any point in violence. I think anytime you ever give violence to resist, you just make yourself look bad, make the government look good. So if you're going to resist and be violent, then, you know, then just know you're going to be making other people look bad. So, but on that note, and anti-fragile and doing what we can do and one foot in front of the other, and the new abnormal we all live in now. Oh, we got to resist, man. We got to resist. I don't want to go along and keep my head down and this and that, just for them to tighten the noose a little bit more around me, my loved ones, my fellow brothers and sisters, my community, the next generation. This is the time. This is the time to resist. And I think in lines of doing what you can do and being anti-fragile and stuff like that, I think sharing information, you know, with people like Christians and stuff like that, I think that would go a lot of good with resistance. I recently just started looking into vaccines more, and I went to the CDC site and I printed off vaccines and the recipes and what's in those vaccines. And I can assure you right now that most people, especially Christians, are not going to be okay. I sent those emails to you guys. Josh, prepare yourself. You read that stuff, brother, because you're going to flip your lid, man. So doing stuff like that, waking up Christians or people, community, and talking to people, I think that's the best we can do. Planting seeds, working on getting out of the country, just anything and everything you can do to make yourself more anti-fragile.
Yeah, that's cool. We're going to get into, in the last hour, we're going to get into some of the more action-oriented stuff. That is good.
There's opportunities. I go back to Alaska, maybe I'll talk to Josh and Rick and Mike, and you know, let's go mine some gold or something. You know, I think I know a guy that knows a little something about heavy equipment, moving dirt and stuff. You know, I know another guy who knows a little something about geology. I think stuff like that's good and positive. And, I think my point, and the only thing I really differ with what I'm hearing is, yeah, be anti-fragile, be moving in the right direction, focus on what's in your control, but at the same time, we have to stop putting our heads down. We have to stop being silent. We have to get active in our community.
Yeah, well, what does that mean, though? I mean, what does that mean? Because waving signs doesn't do anything. Let me throw something out here. Our pastor at church brought this point up, and I thought it was a fantastic point. It was extremely challenging. One of the things that Christians like to do is invite people to come to church. And he suggested the following. He said you should endeavor to invite your friends to church. And the best place to invite them to church would be when you have them over for dinner at your house first. If you're not willing to have them over to your house to have dinner, what are you doing inviting them to church? Like, if you're not willing to build a relationship with them, what are you doing inviting them to church? To tell them that you know how the universe works.
That's a good point, but some would argue that inviting them over to dinner would be the same as inviting them to church.
Some would.
You're inviting them to commune, and that goes to Josh's point in the Bible and stuff like that. You know, where in the Bible does it say you got to go to church? It says, forsake not the congregating together, coming together of the saints, right? You ain't got to go to some building on Sunday or on Wednesday night. That model is not in Scripture. That model is not in Scripture. It does say come together, like book club, stuff like that, just coming together. But to your point, David, I was thinking about, summertime coming up there, June, July. Let's have a big, hamburger grill off and stuff, not just with friends and stuff, but in the community. Right over there by the library park, I'll buy the hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff like that. And just and just give food away. And share love, share truth. That's a good way. That's better than holding signs. Stuff like that.
Extend the invitation.
What would it cost? What would it cost? What would it cost me to, make 500 hamburgers, and hot dogs and stuff like that, and just have a open get together at the park, little love fest, peace fest, talk to people, talk about freedom, talk about, what's wrong with that? I think that does a lot of good. I think it's potentially it could do a lot of good.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is good. In this downtime, there's an opportunity to, even within the rules of, you're not supposed to gather in big groups or whatever, to invite people over or to go over to other people's places. Is that, I've been taking advantage of that. I've been doing that. I have a little bit more time. Had a couple people over, gone over to a couple people's places. We haven't done anything that offends people within the community, but it hasn't kept us from gathering. Is that something you're doing? Are you able to reach out? Are there people in your community where you're staying right now who you can do that with?
Sure, definitely talking to more and more people. Definitely, what is that Tim McGraw song, about his dad who was dying? Live like you were dying? Yeah, a little bit more live like you were dying type stuff. So yeah. And it's good, and it's positive. And you know what? It's like, I'm telling you, man, 9 out of 10 people I talk to, they ain't about all this, man.
Yep.
But I guess the thing I don't agree with you on per se is following the rules. And it goes to another point. And I love you, David, but we're going to argue a little bit here, so I hope it's okay. You talked before about the game. You got to know what the game is and how the game is played and this and that. And I thought about it, and you're not wrong. But then I kept thinking about it. I thought about, well, who's the game makers and this and that, and what gives them the right, this and that. And then I thought, maybe the only way to win the game is not to play the game. And I'm not going to play their game.
Yes, so I agree with that. That's something that Josh
obligated, brother.
That's something that Josh brought up. That's something that Josh brought up, and it's actually something that Christ observed too, when he was confronted with these coins, and they said, "Hey, who are we supposed to pay this tax to? Are we supposed to pay the temple first? Are we supposed to pay God first? Or are we supposed to pay Caesar first?" Well, they were using Caesar's coin. And so Christ said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So I agree with you to the extent that we are, especially if we are benefiting from the system. If we're participating, and this is where like the sovereign citizen people have, they have some points. If we're participating in the system and at the same time complaining about the system, we have to be careful what we're doing there. We got to be careful what we're doing. And if you live in a neighborhood where people like it quiet, and you put glass packs on your car and you drive down the street at 3 a.m., that is not bearing witness. And so that's the whole thing. In our protest, we have to be very careful that we're not tooting our own horn, which is where protests usually go almost immediately.
I 100% agree. 100%. And I think you said it really good maybe this past week, we are still non-aggression people. We are still, voluntarists and what. We respect 7.7 billion boundaries on this planet. And if people want their social distancing, that's fine. I'm not looking to offend anybody. So I agree with you 100%. But I'm not going to do what the politicians say either. So,
Yeah, well, talking to people like you've been doing is great, because then, so there was a guy, I'm sure you've had this experience. There was a guy I was talking to who was, his family situation, the members of his family are pretty concerned about stuff. So he was telling me about that. And I was like, yeah, I understand that. That's good. And basically there was a guy in their community, they had the shared garden space. And there was this guy in their community who ran up to this guy's wife and hugged her. And she's really worried about the virus and trying to maintain social distance. And this guy totally violated her space intentionally.
Yeah.
And she said, stop, don't do that. And he said, this isn't real anyway. You're an idiot. Which is totally wrong. 100% freaking wrong. And
totally wrong.
So we were talking about that, and I was like, yeah, that's BS. But
that goes along. Well, that's the thing, I mean,
so then we got into I agreed with him that was lame, and then we got into a conversation of whether or not this is real in the way it's being presented. And what was interesting was he didn't think it was real in the way it was being presented. But the problem was the only other people, like he'd been kind of closeted in his opinion, but the only other people he knew who were saying that it wasn't real in the way the news was pitching it are going around violating everybody's wishes for their own personal boundaries.
Yeah, I know.
Not acceptable.
That is unacceptable, man. I know, and it makes it so challenging for good moral people like ourselves. But then at the same time, with good moral people like ourselves, I hope I can throw myself in that lot. We still got to get out there. We still got to talk. We got to be good. We got to show it. We got to let that light shine.
So on that note of that last story that you were talking about, can we talk about the mega church in South Korea? That the story was they have a branch in Wuhan. They had people that were infected. They came back to South Korea, and a large percent of their congregation ended up testing positive, and they also fought restrictions to limit their gathering. And it was a big deal, and it seemed to really kick off a lot of the cases that came to South Korea were through this church, and that I think is what people are thinking of now when they say, churches shouldn't be meeting. This is used as the example of why those restrictions are needed. And again, it's an extreme.
I don't get to make that decision for other people because I'm not God. So I'm not the boss of them, and I don't own them. So, and I can't protect them from risk. I think that's one. I'm going to kind of get off topic for a minute. I think you knew where I was going with that anyhow, Corey. But, that's one of the things with modern society and people is they want this ironclad 100% guarantee that no harm is ever going to happen to them. And it doesn't exist. It's irrational thinking. We live in a world of risk. And the best we can do is make good decisions. And, there's people that don't make good decisions, and there's other people who do, and then there's other people who can learn from people making bad decisions, people making good decisions, make decisions for themselves. At the end of the day, people can go and assemble wherever they want, man, as long as they're not harming other people.
Okay, so this is the problem is that
you go to a church. You go to a church.
It has an effect on the community as a whole. I'm going to use their arguments. It's not at some point, if you have a bunch of people together, you can't control the impacts of that on the community at large. Right. So this church, the virus came in, it spread through the church, and then those people, not being careful, went out into their community, and it had a large impact on the rest of the large negative impact on the rest of the community. So they were not able to control the negative impacts of their meeting.
What was the negative impact?
Their city had the highest rate of infection,
which caused...
and the contact tracing caused people to die.
Some of the people went to church. Maybe some of them have a government job, and they brought that virus from a government job into the church. You can't control. That's the bottom line. You can't control.
No,
and then trying to control it is going to bring on way more death and harm, which we're all going to see here in a few months for sure, with the economy and the ripples that are going through it. So
maybe in the long term, but that doesn't show up right away. So it's hard to get people on board with that idea.
That people can't exist. You just have to stop existing. That way there, you have to stop existing. You have to stop acting. You have to stop living. That way there, you will never, ever, 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 ever possibly put anybody else at risk.
Well, it doesn't absolve you of your responsibility, right? It doesn't absolve you of your responsibility in how you act towards others.
It does not.
And that's what Corey's getting at. Like, so these people at this congregation decided to gather. Layla's noting in the comments that apparently this one lady knew she was sick. She had symptoms and stuff like that. So, okay, great. They chose to do that. And then they chose to go hang around people who aren't part of that congregation, who didn't sign up for that degree of exposure.
Right. That's the difference.
Yeah.
The scriptures told, Paul and Peter, the apostles, and Jesus, they told us how we're supposed to act in relation to other people about these things. Peter talked about, I think it was Peter, being all things to all people, right? He didn't mean when you're around a bunch of bad dudes, you act bad because, no, when you're in a community, when you're in a culture, you need to go along with that community and go along with that culture's norms, not outside of what, your beliefs are. But, Paul talked about, this is why women wear head coverings, or this is why a man's hair shouldn't be long, or this is, he brought up different instances, and those are cultural things that he said, this is why we do this, and this is why we do that. He explained those things. And even Jesus said, but since we don't want to offend them, because you have a big mouth, Peter, and told them that we pay the 10, go get this fish, pull the coin out, and go pay it. So there is a lot of cultural sense to use that word. That's not the right word. We're supposed to be conscious of the people we're with and the culture we're in and what other people want or need. And as, anarchists, we believe that people, individual choices, their own individual choices, and we have to respect those. At the same time, verbally, I don't think that counts, because we can say whatever we want outside of being nasty, but.
Well, I like the cultural sensitivity thing. I think you should be sensitive to other people and their boundaries, but also the scripture says, and I'm going to paraphrase, if there's any sick among you, bring them to the church and let the elders, anoint them with oil and pray the prayer of faith over them so they can be healed.
Yep. That's the church's job.
God. And the community is not my God.
Yeah.
No, but the community is
But when somebody else wants to decide for me like that,
yeah,
war with me. They really are. You can't go to work. You can't go to church. I mean, it's absolute sanctions.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is not, what's interesting about this. This is not a new situation for most of the world through most of history.
Correct. It is.
This is the normal situation for most of the world through most of history.
Yeah, I was going to say that to Corey's point too. This isn't any different than 3 months ago. People were going to work sick. People had a cough. People had this. People had that. What's going on is this triggered a lot of phobias. It's creating.
Oh, no. I think we miscommunicated. Being told when you can be certain places and when you can't is normal for most people for most of history. It's not ideal, but it's not the exception.
Well, you know what?
It's new. It's
that
new.
Led us to here. That led us to where we're at now. So
yeah. So what I'm saying is not that it's good, but that there is a lot of history and a lot of precedent for how to be in situations like this. This is a new situation for Americans, not a new situation for a lot of people on Earth right now, and not a new situation for a lot of people across history, including the early church. Let's say in particular, and in particular under the time of Nero. So they live very, very simple, very humble lives. And you actually talked about it, and you got into it, and Corey and Josh got into it too. What game did they decide to play? They were not playing the game of the standard Roman, but that meant they gave up a lot. And that's the whole thing, is to get to the point where we're not playing that game, there's a lot to give up.
Well, the game has changed. They changed the game to where the consequences and everything is much, much more severe, to where I don't think we really can just keep a low profile and be humble. And I mean, always be humble and stuff like that and be a good person always. But they raised the stakes, talking about forced vaccinations and quantum little ID tattoos and stuff like that. They raised the stakes, man. And so what they did is, I think, and where we're at, and I guess where I'm standing on it, it's choose this day which God you're going to serve. Be man or God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
How far they raised the stakes. That's how far they raised the stakes. Because that is what they're trying to implement. And I know everybody's scared. And everybody's disoriented and this and that, and trying to figure out this and that, and I understand. And it's good, but at the same time, you might want to think about, I mean, me for myself, I'm not going to be thinking about making money and houses and doing this and doing that. I'm going to keep my mind on being a good person, getting a deeper relationship with Christ, helping other people, and keep the prize. Keep my mind on the prize. Keep my mind on the goal. If I get distracted by trying to get houses and trying to get this and trying to, like those who try to save their life are going to lose it. And those who lose their life are going to save it. And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. We're all going to have to do a lot of therapy on ourselves, each other, and a lot of mental and emotional building up.
Encouragement. So there's a video, Corey has it queued up, and I want to play it. It's pretty interesting, and it's about different levels of analysis, different levels you can zoom in and out of. And I think one of the things that all of these abstract problems create, like issues, issue conversations are pretty much useless. They're interesting, but they're not particularly useful. like line in the sand conversations. Those are the most useless of all time because they don't deal with how are you, when you're in conflict with somebody or not in conflict with somebody, how are you going to interact in that moment? What are you going to do in that moment? Because that's all that really exists. So you talk about the abstract. Forced vaccination is a good one, right? And that's a good one to think about. Well, you know, in the abstract, it's easy to get wound up about, right? But in the non-abstract, there's all sorts of conversations with your neighbors. There's people, there's your boss, right? Who says, hey, there's this new health plan and I have to do this thing. There's a conversation with him. There's all these interactions with people you actually know that are going to be way more challenging and way more important than the abstract issue itself. And if you look at it from the 10,000-foot perspective, it pulls you out of thinking about all those relationships you're going to have and all those conversations you're going to have, which are where the rubber meets the road. That's where it actually happens.
I got that video on loop. I can just run it with no audio. We can let it run for a little while.
I was just going to say too that Paul commanded us in Romans to live peaceably with everyone as far as it was in our control to do so. So we have, on one side, we have that command to do that. And then on the other side of it, we see where, you know, when Peter was brought before the authorities and they said, hey, we told you to quit doing this. And you would think on one side, you go, well, that's living at peace with them if we just stop doing what we're and obey. But Peter said, we follow God rather than man in this situation. I think we just have to keep that. Those two things don't have to conflict with each other. We can live peacefully as far as we can with other people, but when it comes to God or man, there's no choice to be made. It's already made. It should already be made. Because like if we're waiting right now, well, when the vaccines come out, I'll make up my mind. You're going to do it. You're going to do the vaccine. You know, if you're going to do what's right, you need to make up your mind way before the time comes.
Is anything? So the issues I think are a distraction, because your job is to spread the good news to your community, not to take a stand on this issue. If nobody in your neighborhood knows who you are and you've never helped anybody who lives within 10 miles of you, and you're going to refuse to get vaccinated and that's your pathway to heaven, you're missing the point. And I think it's really tempting. That's the line in the sand conversation with all the 72-hour bad guys. Like,
I'm on the opposite side of that. I think I'm more agree with what Josh said by far. I think if you're just sitting there focusing on, well, I'm going to be a good person and I'm going to share the gospel, and I'm going to go ahead and take this vaccine, and you're missing the point.
It's not necessarily going along and taking. It's not necessarily going along and taking the vaccine, right? It's not the issue. If the issue is your thing, not the relationships you have. It's about the relationships that you have, and then within those relationships, people watch how you act within those relationships. And so if you have a relationship with somebody and they see that guy's making a big sacrifice for a reason I don't understand, and I know that guy and I respect that guy, then it has an impact. If you're holed up in your house, you're completely removed from your community, your decisions do not make an impact. Zero. And so the isolate and be perfect strategy completely misses the point.
I wonder what you're saying a little bit, Dave. What you're saying maybe is we should have relationships with our neighbors and people, our friends, whatever, to where we don't even have to discuss the issue because they know where we stand on it.
That's even better.
We don't even have to discuss vaccinations. We know where they stand on that. We don't have to discuss whether the state can keep us from going to church or not, or what a gathering. Well, we know their stance on that. A relationship should be to the point where singular issues, while they can be talked about expanded on maybe to help people understand when the time comes for them to want to understand. Some people don't want to understand. You can't force them to understand it if they don't want to. But we should have a good enough relationship where people don't even, I mean, we've all had conversations, I'm sure, with people that said, yeah, I thought about you, and I thought, yeah, I know what he'd do in this situation. That should be automatic.
Yeah, I think it's going to come to a head really quick. I think what's more immediate than the vaccine, I could be wrong, is the ability for people to go out and work, make a living, or go like something simple as planting seeds. Hey man, I got to plant some seeds. I got to plant some seeds.
Nobody's stopping you from doing that.
Right?
Nobody's stopping you from doing
that. No, they are. They're stopping people from buying seeds.
You're getting into the abstract, Scott. You're getting into the abstract. No one is stopping you. No one is stopping you from doing that. You're complaining about a problem that isn't yours.
That's a lot like, you guys remember Rose Wilder Lane in The Discovery of Freedom. She talked about that extensively. Did the King of France prevent the French colonists from producing wine? No, they just stopped voluntarily because he told them to. And they say, wow, the king made us. The king didn't make you do anything. It's kind of like with Etienne de la Boétie. The first part of his book there is, the king can't make you do nothing. You do it for him.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is,
I got this email a little bit ago.
That's where we're at. That's not abstract. My example is bad, but my point I was trying to make is free people don't ask permission, and that's exactly where we're at.
True.
Yes,
I agree. I agree with that. I think the point you're making too, I think the point you're making, maybe even unintentionally, is with people are looking at what's going on around us, and they're saying, man, stuff's getting so weird and so bad, I'm not even going to try anymore. And that's where they're giving up what hasn't been taken yet. There's a bunch of things that haven't been taken yet. And many people in the society are already jumping to the conclusion that that's been taken from them. They're giving up stuff that they haven't even been asked to give up yet. And that's where we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that. You can still go meet with your neighbors. You can still go on walks with people. Usually when you go on a walk with somebody, you keep 6 feet from them anyway, or at least 4. There's all this stuff that you don't have. Right. Or if you go snowshoeing or skiing with somebody, there's all this stuff, and it's easy to like, oh, I'm going to watch the news. The news says I can't do anything. Man, I'm going to complain about how I can't do anything. But there's a bunch that you can do, and doing it is the best way to flex that muscle and exercise it and get stronger. And then when it does get taken, when somebody comes and is ripping out your garden, and your neighbors know that you have a garden because you're still building relationships with your neighbors, because that's not illegal. You can go to your neighbors, even right now, even with restrictions on 5 people. When they see the truck out front ripping all your food out of your garden, that's going to have a way bigger impact than if we just go, oh, well, we can't garden, so why bother?
Oh, agreed. Totally agreed. I actually don't even know what we're disagreeing on anymore.
No, we're not. It's just a perspective thing. That's all. We're just talking about looking at it from this way or this way.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic because things aren't as bad as people think they are, and there's always more opportunities than there appear to be. There are always, even in the weird situation we're in. And I don't think America is actually any different now than it was 2 or 3 months ago. I don't think it's different.
I can't help it when you said things are, what is it? The Inspector General with Danny Kaye. Things aren't as bad as they seem. No, boy, they're much, much, much worse.
That's perfect. Right. But they have that.
I can't argue against abstract and concrete and this and that. I could just go based on experience and stuff like that. I mean, we all know economically it's bad. It's super bad, like nothing we've ever seen. And then psychologically, it is too. And your point, one of the shows you had this week, the time it takes to develop bad habits and stuff like that, which is some fantastic insight, by the way. Well, I wonder what the time is to develop a phobia, like people phobia, bacterial phobia, agoraphobia. I'm seeing it now when I go to the stores. Their behavior has been modified pretty much for life, man. They're not going to get over this fear. And so,
I'd say that in a very literal sense,
that's concrete.
this has turned most people into actual xenophobes because they're actually afraid of the people near them. So it's the thing that we've been told not to do for years now is happening at a large scale.
But just what I just said didn't really have anything to do with, I'm still going to treat everybody, all the xenophobes and stuff like that. I'm going to respect all their boundaries. Not a problem. Happy to do it. I hope they respect mine. Because I have boundaries too.
Yep, you can ask.
Well, there'll be a point where they don't.
No.
I mean, we're not
know that for sure.
We're not quite there yet. I wonder is the economy part, the xenophobe part, you're so right, Corey. When I went to Walmart the other day, I saw some Asians and I thought, Chinese virus. And are these different issues we're talking about, are they separate or are they the same issue? Because each one of them can be talked about in the same line, but they can be talked about differently too.
Peugeot wraps them all together. He's got a video on the symbolism of epidemics. And it's fantastic and wonderful. And he says, just put it in the live chat. He says they're all tied together. That's his opinion.
I'm interested in what your economic analysis point was you were trying to make earlier before we got sidetracked. I wanted to make my point so bad, David. You see a lot of opportunities in this and that. But before you start, I just want to just kind of reiterate. For me, I feel it's dangerous for me to, I don't want to talk about distractions and getting caught up in stuff. I don't want to get caught up in trying to money and material things at this point. I want to focus on the spiritual, man. I'm going to have to keep my lamp oil full, brother. You know what I mean? So I'll shut up now.
No, thanks for the call. I mean, that's the thing. Worrying about what hasn't happened yet is not good. Planning for what's likely to happen is pretty good. Like, planning's good. But getting too far down the road is bad news, and getting pulled too far out of relationships is bad news too. Let's kick the video, Corey. Let me throw it up. Hang on, just had a hiccup. Let me throw it up. There's audio, video. There we go. Yeah, let it rip.
The picnic near the lakeside in Chicago, start of a lazy afternoon, early 1 October. We begin with a scene 1 meter wide, which we view from just 1 meter away. Now, every 10 seconds, we will look from 10 times farther away, and our field of view will be 10 times wider. This square is 10 meters wide, and in 10 seconds, the next square will be 10 times as wide. Our picture will center on the picnickers, even after they've been lost to sight. 100 meters wide. The distance a man can run in 10 seconds. Cars crowd the highway. Powerboats lie at their docks. The colorful bleachers are Soldiers Field. This square is 1 kilometer wide, 1,000 meters. The distance a racing car can travel in 10 seconds. We see the great city on the lake shore. 10 to the 4th meters, 10 kilometers. the distance a supersonic airplane can travel in 10 seconds. We see first the rounded end of Lake Michigan, then the whole Great Lake, 10 to the 5th meters, the distance an orbiting satellite covers in 10 seconds. Long parades of clouds, the day's weather in the Middle West. 10 to the 6th, a 1 with 6 zeros, 1,000,000 meters. Soon the Earth will show as a solid sphere. We are able to see the whole Earth now, just over a minute along the journey. The Earth diminishes into the distance, but those background stars are so much farther away that they do not yet appear to move. A line extends at the true speed of light. In 1 second, it half crosses the tilted orbit of the moon. Now we mark a small part of the path in which the Earth moves about the Sun. Now the orbital paths of the neighbor planets, Venus and Mars, then Mercury. Entering our field of view is the glowing center of our solar system, the Sun, followed by the massive outer planets, swinging wide in their big orbits. That odd orbit belongs to Pluto. A fringe of a myriad comets too faint to see completes the solar system. Ten to the 14th. As the solar system shrinks to one bright point in the distance, our sun is plainly now only one among the stars. Looking back from here, we note 4 southern constellations, still much as they appear from the far side of the Earth. This squares 10 to the 16th meters, 1 light year, not yet out to the next star. Our last 10-second step took us 10 light years further. The next will be 100. Our perspective changes so much in each step now that even the background stars will appear to converge. At last, we pass the bright star Arcturus and some stars of the Dipper. Normal but quite unfamiliar stars and clouds of gas surround us as we traverse the Milky Way galaxy. Giant steps carry us into the outskirts of the galaxy. And as we pull away, we begin to see the great flat spiral facing us. The time and path we chose to leave Chicago has brought us out of the galaxy along a course nearly perpendicular to its disk. The 2 little satellite galaxies of our own are the clouds of Magellan. 10 to the 22nd power, 1,000,000 light years. Groups of galaxies bring a new level of structure to the scene. Glowing points are no longer single stars, but whole galaxies of stars seen as one. We pass the big Virgo cluster of galaxies among many others, 100 million light years out. As we approach the limit of our vision, we pause to start back home. This lonely scene, the galaxies like dust, is what most of space looks like. This emptiness is normal. The richness of our own neighborhood is the exception. The trip back to the picnic on the lakefront will be a sped-up version, reducing the distance to the Earth's surface by 1 power of 10 every 2 seconds. In each 2 seconds, we will appear to cover 90% of the remaining distance back to Earth. Notice the alternation between great activity and relative inactivity, a rhythm that will continue all the way into our next goal, a proton in the nucleus of a carbon atom beneath the skin on the hand of the sleeping man at the picnic. Ten to the 9th meters, 10 to the 8th, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are back at our starting point. We slow up at 1 meter, 10 to the 0 power. Now we reduce the distance to our final destination by 90% every 10 seconds, each step much smaller than the one before. At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin, crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA. As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, a molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At the atomic scale, the interplay of form and motion becomes more visible. We focus on one commonplace group of 3 hydrogen atoms bonded by electrical forces to a carbon atom. 4 electrons make up the outer shell of the carbon itself. They appear in quantum motion as a swarm of shimmering points. At 10 to the minus 10 meters, 1 angstrom, we find ourselves right among those outer electrons. Now we come upon the 2 inner electrons held in a tighter swarm. As we draw toward the atom's attracting center, we enter upon a vast inner space. At last, the carbon nucleus. So massive and so small. This carbon nucleus is made up of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. We are in the domain of universal modules. There are protons and neutrons in every nucleus, electrons in every atom, atoms bonded into every molecule out to the farthest galaxy. As a single proton fills our scene, we reach the edge of present understanding. Are these some quarks in intense interaction? Our journey has taken us through 40 powers of 10. If now the field is 1 unit, then when we saw many clusters of galaxies together, it was 10 to the 40th, or 1 and 40 zeros.
Nice. Yeah, so that is an illustration of like, yeah,
puts things in perspective.
yeah. Whichever perspective you want to take. And there's all the different levels that you can zoom in and zoom out from. And different ones will lead you to different conclusions. So if you zoom too far out, if you zoom out from the personal level, which is the picnic, you're going to view, states and cities, and you think that the world is a battle between these abstract things or whatever. If you zoom really far out, well, there's the whole universe, and so maybe none of it matters, right? It's all noise. Or you zoom really far in, and all that there is genetic material and atoms, and so there's no people, there's no consciousness, whatever. So all those levels are real, but which ones are relevant? So it frames the questions that you ask. That is the point of that. You like the Twilight Zone there?
That was good.
We got another caller on. You guys ready?
I know what I'm watching today.
Yes. Oh, good call. Good call.
Yeah,
the obsolete man.
Oh, Twilight Zone.
Yeah. I'm going to bring the next caller in. Caller, you are on air.
So hi, it's Layla.
Hey, Layla.
One of the things that I've discovered in the conversations I'm doing on Facebook with, and I've got people calling in from, I'm not calling, but, commenting in from, Europe and Australia and things like that, because it's an offshoot of a authors group that we all met online somewhere. And so is it most people, they have a very short sight on everything. They're down at that picnic blanket level, and they view history in the exact same way. I've got, people who will be like, I'm trying to think of how to word it. Because the person who said it rather profanely. And yes, I know this is a podcast, but I don't talk like that. The idea that it doesn't really matter that things have happened in the past that have shown that this idea that they want to pursue will not work. We're just going to try it. It'll be fine. And it's like, it's so short-sighted because they don't realize that there are consequences. In this case, it was a discussion of universal basic income. And it was like, really, you guys honestly believe that if the government just gave everybody money to sit on their butts, it wouldn't have a consequence? Everybody would enjoy life, and we wouldn't be slaves to our job anymore. It's like, really? So you don't think that who are you planning on mining? The rich people? The rich people are going to pick up and they're going to go to wherever, so they get away from that. It's just there's no macro view of anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, they don't know the story. I mean, stories are always about characters, right? And a character's journey and things like that. And they don't know the story, which is, history, or even better, like all these stories are in the Bible with a lot of, good refinement and study. So
right.
That doesn't mean that you can stop them from doing what they're going to do. One of the things Mike talks about pretty often are these cycles.
Right.
That just seem like, they emerge or whatever. And then we see that we were talking about on Monday, we were talking about Nebuchadnezzar and, making a statue where he's golden, and even though his dream was that his feet were made of clay. And then De La Boetie has this book, the Politics of Obedience, where he talks about the same thing. He talks about this giant colossus who crumbles when consent's removed. And then David Icke was talking. He had an interview on Monday, and he was talking about the same thing. So knowing about, and the prophets talk about this all the time. If you read through the prophets in the Bible, they go through the same issue.
Nathan didn't confront David directly with his sin. He told a story.
And
David pronounced his own judgment based on that story.
Yep. And right. And in the case, because he already knew. In the case of the prophets, their prophecy didn't necessarily, most of the time did not stop ruin from coming.
No.
The purpose was not to stop ruin from coming. It was, which is kind of what the show, kind of what the show's about.
Right.
So that's where like standing in front of the train is kind of a dumb idea. But letting people who are getting on the train know this is going off a cliff, that's useful. That can be helpful.
Yeah, if they will get off the train.
If they will, even if they don't, because they'll be there, and they'll there's often this happened in my own life. I got on my own train that was going off a cliff. And a lot of people told me that ahead of time, and when it went off the cliff, I was like, oh, those guys were right. Dang it. And it was too late. Like the damage was done, and things fell apart. Things came unglued. But then when it came time to put things back together, for me personally, I knew exactly who to go to. I went to the people I despised the most, because I didn't despise them. I was angry at them because they told me something I didn't want to be true, and then I had to discover that it was. And then when I did, I went to them because it was like, something that I didn't know, and you tried to tell me to help me out, and I ignored you. So could you tell me again? And they did. So there's a role to play there, and I think that role is more important than trying to stop people.
Right. Yeah, I'm not really thinking about trying to stop anybody so much as, it's like you say things to them and hope that eventually they won't be able to unhear what they've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when reality gives them natural consequences for their being silly, then they will go, oh, wait a minute. Wait. I don't even remember who that person was, but yeah, maybe there's a different path to take. And what I find with the Europeans, because I mentioned in the chat earlier, that we're all in our own echo chambers. The United States press has one narrative, more or less, that it's telling. It's given to them by a few sources that are all kind of in agreement. The European press, I think, must have the same thing. If you go out and read the European press, you check against the United States press. The Europeans don't know that. They don't ever go over and look at U.S. press to see if their own press is lying to them. They're convinced their press is telling the truth, 100%. And so they're in their own echo chamber. And, it's like, you run across one or two every now and then on certain subjects where you'll go, oh, you think differently than your neighbors. That's good. But for the most part, they're in their echo chambers just as much as the Americans are. It's just an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm. It's we live. Well, you decide which story you want to live within.
Well, yeah. Plus, there's the idea that the common knowledge, the word, what they hear the most often must be the truth.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Yep.
And I find that I want to do that. I'll go, oh, well, I've heard that from 5 different sources. It must be true.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stop and go, wait a minute. You were a reporter whose editor told you to slant the news beneath his political agenda. Do you really believe that that's not happening still? Oh, yeah. Wake up, Layla. Don't be stupid. But it's a human attribute, I think. And we carry that into everything, even when we know better. Those of us who know better, stop ourselves, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And go, oh, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who really, it's like they're still back in the Walter Cronkite days, and they don't believe that Uncle Walt would lie to them.
Well, that stuff works because it works on human factors. This is something that our last caller, Mr. Nameless, would talk about, which is that people are, pretty much the same. And this is all Roman times stuff too. This happened in Roman times. That's what the gospel meant, the good news of Caesar's victory. Because whenever the Romans went out to take a city, the gospel would come back. And it was the news of Caesar's victory over evil and the establishment of peace on earth. And in the case of Caesar, it was untrue because it was, well, many of the victories were made up. You could manufacture news. Even if you lost the battle, you could say that you won.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the Celts really thought that they had peace. I think they thought they had slavery.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Well, and even the places that the message was coming back to, places like where Christ was, like the gospel of Caesar's victory was coming back to the land of the Israelites, where they knew they were in slavery, and they'd hear about Caesar's victory and the establishment of peace. It's no different than what we have today. Orchestrated news, fake news. We read these stories, we don't see ourselves in them.
So here's the question I have. Let's see if you guys can come up with it. I'm definitely making a push with our church to try to reinstitute things like Sunday school via Zoom or something like that, so that we can at least start talking to one another again. These podcast things where they're presenting it to me and there's no feedback, don't really like that. I mean, some of us are talking on Facebook, but yeah. But I want to start not pushing them, encouraging them to consider going back to start church service. And I don't want to be, boxing dictatorial about it and say, hey, I'm just going to go to another church now. I would rather bring the church that I attend back together if I can. So, any ideas how you do that?
Have you invited? Yeah, sure, 100%. So the church.
When I've had one-on-one conversations with people, they've been, oh no, that would be against the law. And it's not so much they think it's dangerous, it's against the law.
Well, this is where you get into the interesting, like Josh brought up a pretty good point about, the church not meeting. But what does that mean? It could mean a lot of things. So the church that I go to has been doing services over Zoom, and the attendance has been pretty good. Like, basically the same attendance as people who show up in person. And then we have a small group. It's like 6 of us. We usually meet once a month. We're doing meetings once a week now, again over Zoom. And then a couple folks from that group have come over a couple times, and we've gone on walks and talked about stuff. There's no issue. All of us haven't gathered in the same building in a month. It has created zero issue for the cohesiveness of the community. No issue at all.
Mm-hmm.
So are you,
My thing is,
church isn't that building.
Meet over Zoom. I don't find it very worshipful. I don't get that oneness of the congregation feeling that
invite
I get.
a couple people over to your house. It's not illegal. How many people have you invited over from your church?
My husband didn't. Oh, actually, 2 of them would have been from our church if they'd come.
If they come.
Last night my husband did a Good Friday Lord's Supper in our kitchen, and he scored a box of matzahs and just said, "I'm going to do this." My son and his girlfriend showed up, and they were the only ones. And then we had one friend actually Skype in. But basically the attitude was all, oh no, that would be dangerous. We'd be putting everybody at risk.
So I think you're doing what you can. And the people who really want that community, the people who really feel it's their community, will continue to participate in it, regardless of if there's a few hurdles. And the people who don't.
I do catch a few hints of people starting to say this is ridiculous.
Sure. I think most people feel it's ridiculous. I think the bigger question is, who's willing to? There's no problem, even legally, for people to go to each other's houses. Certainly in small numbers, and in larger numbers, the conversation gets different anyway. If no one is going to each other's houses in small numbers to maintain the cohesion of the community, and no one's making the time to even Skype with each other or Zoom, does the community really exist? That would be my question. Or is it a club?
Right.
The clubhouse is not the church. It's the relationships between the people there.
There are big conversations going on Facebook. But
okay, so great. I mean, I would build off of that.
And my guessing is that a lot of people in our church, I mean, the younger ones are, tech savvy, but I'm thinking the people my age and up, I'm one of the few people I think that really, I will adopt things like Zoom or MS Teams or something like that. I think a lot of people, and I feel very, very badly for the older people in our church who don't have, they don't even have computers in their home because are afraid of them, really, basically. Yeah, and they don't know how to make them work. And it's like,
This is an opportunity. You're describing an opportunity. The pastor at my church, the average age of my church is like almost 80, something like that. And the pastor in my church, again, because small numbers of people can still visit each other, he went to a couple people's places or got on over the phone and explained to them how to set up Zoom and how to run it. The community, if the community desires communion, it will find a way.
right.
And if it doesn't, if it requires a building and a scheduled time on Sunday, and it doesn't work outside of that, then it's just a building and a scheduled time on Sunday.
Right.
This might be a whole thing where we're being forced to go back to what the original church did. They didn't go to a giant building with 300 people or 500 people or 5,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even when you go to church, or maybe it's just me, but you only interact with a few people. You don't go through the whole church and say hello to every single person there and build a relationship with every single. Even if there's only 80 people in the church, there's a few people that you build a relationship with. Those are the ones that you have. That's the church. And maybe that's you, building relationships in a church. How do you do that? In a big building? No. Having dinner at your house. Having communion at your house.
Yeah, and that was one of the things.
Is my microphone working? Because I want to say something about the train real quick.
It's like echoing.
Okay.
It's like I hear two of you.
I was just thinking about. Well, you hear it better when it's said twice. That's what my grandpa said. I was just thinking about the train. So you think about Isaiah's job, and God told him, go to these people and speak to them, and they're not going to listen to you. So we need to assume that the message that we spread is not going to be listened to. And you can't save everyone. We have to assume the majority of people are going to fall in line with what the state tells them to do, for instance. But we're told to do it anyways because of the remnant. There are some people that need to hear it. So that's why we do it. Not to expect everyone to fall in line with it. Some people are going to board the train. And there are some trains that physical obstacles might have to be put up to stop it so the people can get off once they realize where they're going. But the start is just telling the remnant what's going on. They need to hear it. And then we have to allow people to get on the trains. And then certain trains, like I said, we have to stop. Because sometimes you get on the train and then you can't get off once you figure it out. It's too late. Well, then there's other people that aren't the Isaiahs. They have a different job. They're the roadblocks that open the train doors to let the people back out.
Right.
But we can't assume or get upset or frustrated that people don't listen to us, that everyone's going along with it. Of course everyone's going along with it. That's just the nature of human beings. The church has struggled with that since day one. Look where they lived. They lived with they had a real empire too. The Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Their own Jews wouldn't listen to Christ's teaching. And the Pharisees, the teachers of the day, they wouldn't hear any of it. Nope, we're not going to listen. In fact, we're going to put you in jail. It might be obvious to us, but it's not obvious to the rest of the world.
One thing, this is Mike. One thing that I wonder too is regarding the church. I put these up in the private comments, not in the live comments. A lot of people get bored going to church. There's no risk in it. You can gather every Sunday, listen to some guy talk, and go home. But now there's risk in it. And that seems to be inspiring a few people to try to defy the commands of the state. Now it's getting exciting. how many people will that draw in? It makes me, if you look at China, we had a guest on, Josh, was it 2 years ago, Brooke, who was helping the church in China.
Yeah, it's about 2 years.
Yeah, and the church was huge over there. And it was an act of rebellion, and it was exciting for them, and it was a central part of their lives. Perhaps this whole event is going to actually help the church in its growth. People will see it's dangerous, it's exciting. It actually means something other than just getting together and listening to some guy talk. Just a perspective to put out there.
Yeah.
Community in action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The church has always done pretty well under persecution.
Mm-hmm. And it's a test of the people who are there.
Right.
There will be no shortage of opportunities for that in the coming year or two. There's a lot of people who don't have jobs to go back to, and they're going to need community support. And the handouts aren't going to work. We know the handouts aren't going to work.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, there's just not enough money, just so to speak, backed by anything real that the government can continue to support people who aren't working. And
and for some people, their work
that will eventually drive inflation, and then people will be like, "Well, gee, thank you for the $1,000 a month or whatever you just gave me, but it costs $1,000 a month, $1,000 to buy a loaf of bread."
For some people, their work is what keeps them out of trouble too.
Yes.
And so it's not just like the community involvement, that the opportunities for community involvement that the church is going to see, to the extent that it's a church and not a club, is going to involve stuff like working with people. It's not going to be like there's the bread line side of it. Everybody likes to think, oh, I want to be the guy handing out the bread. But then there's the actual building community and working with people who can't get work elsewhere. There's going to be a lot of outreach opportunities that are way more difficult than just giving people some food.
I think that too. I don't particularly, the home churches I've seen have been usually one guy. There was one I ran across where it was a woman that was in charge. But they always become very egocentric and very much the leaders of the vision. And I've always walked away because as soon as you start going against what the Bible says and saying that sections of it aren't necessary, or they need something that's totally outlandish, I'm like, no, I'm out of here.
Start one that's not that way.
Right. Well, but here's the thing. I think that people are going to struggle. One of the things that's very convenient about the big church service is you can go to church and get fed on the word, have sometimes your presuppositions challenged. I always look for that in a pastor. And not have to necessarily be confronted on your nonsense. And so that's convenient. It's not necessarily good. And I think people are going to really struggle with that when it comes, if we're stuck doing it in the small groups all the time. Because in small groups, you can look at each other in the eye and you can say, what are you hiding?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and even though I deliberately seek out pastors that challenge my presuppositions, even I like to be anonymous and not have to necessarily answer about what is my nonsense behind my act.
It will be a time of discomfort, that's for sure. Probably long overdue for everybody.
Yeah. I think that, I can think of some people that I probably shouldn't be in a group with because I would call them on their nonsense.
that's probably the group you should be with. This whole the running from discomfort is like the American pastime these days, and I don't exclude myself from that. I include myself in that. But there's not going to be an opportunity to run from discomfort here on any level, in any dimension, and that's where strength comes from. That's part of the reason people are weak across dimensions is they've run from discomfort. They have relationships that there's trouble in. They hide from it. They have conflicts with friends or with colleagues or whatever that they can paper over because everything's fine. Like if you're making money, you can paper over a lot of stuff. So they hide from it.
In a large church, you don't have to get along with everyone.
Oh, well, you're never going to get along with everyone, but church is a place to practice with other people who agree on the most fundamental thing. It's a place to practice challenging relationships. It's not a place to run from them. Of course, there's going to be people who don't agree at church. There's a guy in mind right now who's at my church who I agree with on very little. And it's amazing because we can navigate a bunch of conflicts because we can always come back to our agreement that Christ is the Messiah and that our job above everything else is to do what we can to emulate him. And that doesn't change the fact that we disagree about stuff. It doesn't make us agree about more things. It lets us talk about that stuff without dehumanizing each other. And small churches that's necessary in small churches. So that might be why. It might be good that big churches can't meet right now. Who knows? Like, I'm not saying it should be that way.
It would also be a really good reason to believe, because that's what happened. We went to a church that was, it had several congregations, but all added up to be the largest Southern Baptist church in Fairbanks at one point. And through a series of things that happened, the congregation shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Until there was one woman that we didn't hate her. I didn't hate her, but I wouldn't have chosen to hang out with her. And when the congregation got really, really small, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, it gradually built, we couldn't get away from each other. And that was a really good reason to go find another church. Because, it was either we were going to have conflict all the time, or we were going to, and conflict's good to a certain extent when it challenges you to a higher level. In this case, this was conflict that was meant to pull other people down.
Sure, which is not ideal.
At a certain point, I have to say, I can't do this anymore. Now, and which made me actually recognize why the church was shrinking, and a larger issue was at hand. It just happened that my conflict with her was what made it so that it was no longer comfortable enough to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And just say, oh, if I just keep working in ministry here and stuff, things will get better.
Yeah, not always, which is something you learn too. That's an opportunity to learn there as well.
Yeah,
so for sure. We're actually past our time now, so I'm going to let you go, and we are going to wrap up. Thanks for the call.
Bye.
Are we at wrap up time already?
Yes, we are.
Just for people thinking about church stuff here, this could be just the beginning too. It could be, hey, don't complain, we're letting you meet by Zoom and YouTube and blah, 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 to, hey, don't complain, we're giving you this channel for all the churches to use. We just need to monitor it so we can make sure you're not spreading any false news about the coronavirus. It could get much, much worse. But I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. We have to have our minds made up now, not when the time comes up. Because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in an hour from now. Shouldn't matter.
I had a thought this morning. I was on the way to Lowe's. maybe, we look at Bill Gates as this megalomaniacal evil guy, right? He's doing the devil's work. In reality, maybe he's just God's useful idiot. And what I mean by that is this is a change that was really due anyway. It's something that needs to happen. Americans are spoiled. They have anything that they want at their fingertips, or they have. And maybe this is the plan. Maybe this is by design. Maybe this is necessary. And in my opinion, it is necessary for people to learn to do without a little bit. Not by some tyrannical force necessarily, but something has to bring it about. And maybe that's what Bill Gates' purpose is. He doesn't realize what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's doing. He thinks he does, but that's just how he's being used at the moment.
Yeah, that could be the case. That could be the case. There's the interesting.
Pharaoh certainly saw that happen to him.
Mm-hmm.
Nebuchadnezzar saw, throughout the Old Testament especially.
Mm-hmm.
Pilate
even
saw
with
that
Pilate,
happen
yeah.
to him.
Pilate, right. And Pilate, interestingly, he recognized that he was in a position where doing the right thing wasn't what he was going to do. He's like, well, I don't have a problem with you, but they do. And they elected me. So I'm like, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if the empire collapses and we can't kill little kids in the Middle East anymore, bring it on.
Well, how long have we been asking for that to happen? And,
bring it on.
Maybe here it is, and people are complaining.
Yeah. Just got to be ready to do work. If it's not around, there's going to be lots of work to do. And a lot of the people who, libertarian types are like, yeah, we need to abolish this, that, and the other thing. Mm-hmm. Well, it might be abolished, and there's going to be a lot of cleanup work to do. So get your brooms and dustpans.
That's for sure.
Either be careful what you ask for, or appreciate it when it comes, right?
Yep. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and whether we live in fear for the whole thing or we accept the new challenges coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We have to accept them and embrace them, because they're going to come no matter what. Whatever is going to happen, it's going to happen no matter what we do here on the show or work or whether we go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We got some other stuff I was going to get around to, but we got some good calls, so let's just defer that till next time. Thank you guys for being on, and thanks to all the people in the chat and calling. It was very lively.
And join us Monday for sure.
Becky Akers Monday. That shows at usually around 1 p.m. Alaska time.
Cool.
Yep, look for it. I'll get the stream scheduled over the weekend, so you'll be able to subscribe.
I believe that'll be a lively conversation.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Yeah, thanks for setting that up.
That'd be a lot of fun. Yeah,
right,
great. Thanks, guys.
Yep, see you guys on Monday.
See ya. Later.